I'm Isabella Chen, 23 years old, and I'm sitting alone at the most exclusive restaurant in Manhattan, staring at a $15,000 bill I can't possibly pay. My hands are trembling as I read the handwritten note my parents left behind. Let's see how failure finds her way out of this one. Consider it life training. The leather check presenter feels like it weighs 1,000 pounds as I struggle to catch my breath. If you're reading this, let me know where you're from in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button to follow my journey from this humiliating moment to the incredible transformation it sparked. You won't believe where this story leads. Growing up as the daughter of Margaret and David Chun meant living under constant scrutiny. My parents had built their tech consulting empire from a small startup into a multi-million-dollar corporation within 15 years. Their rags-to-riches story was the stuff of business magazines, but it cast an enormous shadow over every aspect of my childhood. Our penthouse apartment on the Upper East Side was a monument to their success, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park and contemporary art pieces that cost more than most people's cars. But the pristine perfection of our home felt more like a museum than a place where a child could grow and make mistakes. Every surface was spotless, every room arranged with mathematical precision. "Excellence isn't optional, Isabella," my father would say while reviewing my report cards. "It's the minimum standard in this family." An A- in advanced placement chemistry wasn't cause for celebration. It was grounds for concerned discussions about declining performance and additional tutoring sessions. My mother, always impeccably dressed and perpetually busy with board meetings and charity galas, would nod in agreement. "We're investing in your future," she'd explain while scheduling another weekend workshop or summer enrichment program. "One day you'll thank us for pushing you to be the best version of yourself." The lessons in perfectionism started early. When I was 8, I forgot a single line during my school's holiday pageant. Instead of comfort or reassurance, I received 2 weeks of daily speech coaching in our living room. At 13, I placed second in a regional debate tournament. My reward was 3 additional hours of practice every day for 6 weeks because second place is first loser, according to my father's business philosophy. The defining moment came during my senior year of high school. Despite maintaining a perfect 4.0 GPA, serving as student body president, and earning acceptance to multiple Ivy League universities, I committed what my parents considered the ultimate betrayal. I chose to attend the Rhode Island School of Design instead of Harvard Business School's undergraduate program. Fashion design? My father had practically spat the words while holding my RSD acceptance letter like it was contaminated. "That's not a career, Isabella. That's an expensive hobby for rich kids who don't want to work." My mother's disappointment was quieter, but equally devastating. "I just don't understand why you'd waste your intelligence on something so frivolous," she said, her voice carrying that familiar note of resigned disappointment that had become the soundtrack to our relationship. Despite their vocal disapproval, I followed my passion. 4 years at RSD gave me my first real taste of creative freedom, though the financial strings attached meant I could never completely escape their influence. They paid my tuition, reluctantly, and never let me forget what they considered their misguided investment in my future. After graduation, I landed a position as an assistant designer at a small but respected fashion house in Brooklyn. For 18 months, I maintained my independence, even though my tiny studio apartment could fit inside my parents' walk-in closet. I was finally making it on my own terms, creating clothes that made people feel beautiful and confident. Then the economy shifted. Supply chain issues and rising costs hit the fashion industry hard. As the newest hire, I was the first to be let go when the company had to downsize. With rent due, student loans demanding payment, and my savings account nearly empty, I faced the humiliating prospect of moving back home at 23. My parents' response to my predicament was a mixture of smug satisfaction and conditional generosity. "Of course you can stay with us," my mother said over the phone, her tone suggesting she'd been expecting this call for years. "Maybe now you'll consider a more practical career path." The move back to the penthouse re-established old patterns with frightening efficiency. My childhood bedroom remained exactly as I'd left it, a shrine to academic achievements and extracurricular trophies. But new rules were quickly implemented, curfews, daily check-ins, and mandatory career counseling sessions that invariably involved pamphlets for MBA programs. The word failure began appearing more frequently in my parents' vocabulary. It wasn't always direct. Sometimes it was wrapped in concern or disguised as helpful advice, but it was constant. Each job rejection email or unanswered portfolio submission became evidence in their ongoing case against my chosen profession. 4 months into this arrangement, my father announced we would be having dinner at Le Bernardin, one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city where reservations typically required months of advance planning. "We're meeting with the Hartmans," he explained, referring to longtime business partners. "This is an important evening. Dress appropriately." The car ride into Manhattan was suffocatingly silent, except for my mother's periodic critiques of my appearance. "Couldn't you have chosen something more conservative?" she asked, examining my black dress, the only formal outfit I owned that still fit properly. First impressions are everything in business. I stared out the window at the city lights, watching pedestrians hurry along the sidewalks below, completely unaware that this dinner would become the catalyst for the most dramatic change of my life. Le Bernardin occupied several floors of a prestigious midtown building, its understated elegance speaking to the kind of wealth that didn't need to announce itself. A uniformed doorman recognized my father immediately and ushered us through the marble lobby to a private elevator that delivered us directly to the restaurant. The maitre d' greeted us with the kind of deferential warmth reserved for regular high-spending customers. "Mr. Chen, such a pleasure to see you again. Your table is prepared exactly as requested." We followed him through the dimly lit dining room, past tables of well-dressed diners engaged in hushed conversations that probably involved more money than I'd ever seen. Crystal stemware caught the light from carefully positioned fixtures, and the soft sounds of classical music created an atmosphere of refined sophistication. I felt underdressed despite wearing my best outfit and the pearl necklace my grandmother had given me for graduation. This was a world I'd grown up adjacent to, but never felt I truly belonged in. I felt underdressed despite wearing my best outfit and the pearl necklace my grandmother had given me for graduation. This was a world I'd grown up adjacent to, but never felt I truly belonged in. Richard and Patricia Hartman were already seated at our reserved table. Richard stood to greet my father with a kind of firm handshake that indicated years of successful business dealings, while Patricia offered my mother an air kiss that suggested long-standing social connections. "And this must be Isabella," Richard said, turning toward me with appraising eyes that made me feel like a business proposal being evaluated. "David tells me you're staying with them temporarily while you figure out your next steps." The way he phrased it made my recent unemployment sound like an extended vacation, rather than the professional and financial crisis it actually was. I forced what I hoped was a confident smile and extended my hand. "It's lovely to meet you both." Isabella was working in fashion, my mother added as we took our seats, the past tense making my career sound definitively over. Unfortunately, that industry can be quite unstable. Patricia nodded with practiced sympathy. "My sister's daughter went through something similar. She's in consulting now, much more secure. There's always a place for smart young women in business." The conversation moved on before I could defend my chosen field, shifting to topics I had no context for. Mutual acquaintances, recent business deals, vacation homes in the Hamptons. I remained largely silent, studying the menu with growing anxiety as I absorbed the astronomical prices. Appetizers started at $120. Main courses climbed well into the hundreds. When the sommelier appeared with a leather-bound wine list, my father ordered a bottle of Dom Perignon that cost more than I used to make in a month. "We're celebrating tonight," my father announced as the champagne was poured with ceremonial precision. "Richard and I just finalized the Meridian acquisition. 3 years in the making." Glasses were raised in a toast to their success, and I participated despite having no understanding of what the Meridian acquisition entailed. My parents had never included me in their business discussions, viewing my lack of interest in corporate strategy as another character flaw. When it came time to order, my father waved dismissively at the menu. "Don't worry about the prices tonight, Isabella. This is a special occasion. Order whatever appeals to you." The others selected their courses with the casual confidence of people accustomed to such extravagance. Caviar service, Wagyu beef, lobster prepared in ways I'd never heard of. I chose the least expensive options I could find, which were still outrageously priced by any normal standard. Throughout the meal, I attempted to contribute to the conversation several times, only to be politely redirected or interrupted. When I mentioned an emerging designer whose work had caught my attention, my mother smoothly changed the subject to the Hartmans' recent trip to Milan. By the time the main course arrived, I'd given up trying to participate and focused instead on the beautifully plated food in front of me. Halfway through dinner, my father's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and frowned. "This is Morrison," he said to Richard. "We should probably take this call. It's about the Singapore project." "And I need to freshen up," my mother added, standing gracefully. "Patricia, would you join me?" Within moments, I was alone at the table, surrounded by the elegant buzz of other diners and the soft clink of expensive silverware against fine china. I checked my watch, expecting them to return momentarily. 10 minutes passed, then 20. At the 30-minute mark, I began to feel genuinely concerned. I sent a text to my mother. "Everything okay? You've been gone a while." No response. 45 minutes later, the waiter approached with dessert menus and a polite inquiry. "Will the rest of your party be returning soon, miss?" "I think so," I said, though doubt was beginning to creep in. "They're just handling some business matters." He nodded professionally and retreated, only to return 10 minutes later with a leather folder that made my stomach drop to the floor. "The gentleman asked me to bring this to you," he said, placing the check presenter in front of me with a kind of careful neutrality that suggested he suspected something was wrong. With trembling hands, I opened the folder. The bill inside was a single sheet of pristine paper with a number that made me gasp audibly: $15,327.48. Beneath the total, written in my father's unmistakable handwriting, was a note that felt like a physical blow. "Let's see how failure finds her way out of this one. Consider it life training." The restaurant seemed to tilt around me as I stared at the impossible sum. My chest tightened, making each breath feel insufficient. This couldn't be real. Even for parents who specialized in harsh lessons, this level of cruelty seemed unimaginable. I fumbled for my phone with shaking hands, calling my father first. The call went straight to voicemail. My mother's phone did the same. Growing panic made my movements clumsy as I sent increasingly desperate text messages. "This isn't funny. Please come back. I can't pay this. Where are you?" The messages showed as delivered but remained unread. After several more frantic attempts, I discovered the devastating truth. Both numbers had blocked me completely. This wasn't a momentary lesson that had gone too far. They had planned this humiliation with calculated precision. The waiter returned, hovering near the table with professional concern. "Is everything all right, miss?" "My parents will be back any minute," I lied, my voice cracking with strain. "They're just handling some urgent business." He nodded, but his expression suggested he'd seen enough abandoned diners to recognize the signs. "Of course. Please take your time." As he walked away, I noticed other patrons beginning to glance in my direction. The wealthy crowd seemed to sense drama, and my visible distress was attracting unwanted attention. The weight of their curious stares added another layer to my humiliation. With desperate hope, I opened my banking app on my phone. My checking account balance stared back at me: $347.23. My savings account held another $1,200. Even combined, I had barely enough to cover the wine they'd ordered, let alone the entire meal. This wasn't the first cruel lesson my parents had orchestrated, but it was by far the most devastating. When I was 17, they'd cancel my credit cards without warning while I was shopping for prom dresses, forcing me to call them from the store to beg for help. During my sophomore year of college, they'd forgotten to pay my meal plan to teach me about budgeting, leaving me scrounging for food until I could convince them to restore it. But this was different. This was public humiliation designed to shatter what little confidence I had left in my ability to survive independently. The restaurant manager appeared at my table, his expression carefully neutral but alert. His name tag read James. "Miss Chun, I hope everything has been satisfactory this evening," he said, though his tone suggested he was already aware of my predicament. I swallowed hard, fighting back tears. There seems to be some confusion. My parents stepped out, but they're handling the bill. James's expression remained diplomatically blank. "Your father called the restaurant 20 minutes ago. He specifically informed us that you would be settling the account yourself this evening." My heart sank even further. There was no misunderstanding, no miscommunication. This was exactly what they had planned. "I'm afraid there's been a mistake," I whispered, though I knew there hadn't been. "I don't have access to that kind of money." His professional demeanor became noticeably cooler. "I see. In that case, I'll need to ask you to contact someone who can assist you with resolving this situation. Otherwise, we may need to involve law enforcement." The threat of police involvement sent a fresh wave of panic through me. Images from crime shows flashed through my mind, being arrested, handcuffed, led away in front of all these wealthy diners. Could my parents really want this to happen to their own daughter? "Please," I begged, tears finally spilling over. "Give me a few minutes to figure something out. I just need to make some calls." With shaking fingers, I called my best friend Sarah, the only person I trusted to potentially help in such a crisis. "Isabella? What's wrong?" She answered immediately, clearly hearing the distress in my voice. "I'm at Le Bernardin and my parents abandoned me with a $15,000 bill," I managed to say through my tears. "They left a note calling it life training. I don't know what to do."
$15,000.
Sarah gasped. "Isabella, I wish I could help, but I don't have that kind of money. I could maybe transfer you $300, but that's literally everything I have until my next paycheck." It wasn't nearly enough, but it was something. Any help felt like a lifeline. "Thank you," I said gratefully. "I'll figure out the rest somehow." After hanging up, James suggested I try contacting other family members. With limited options, I called my Aunt Linda, my mother's sister who had always been more understanding than my immediate family. "Sweetheart, I'm so sorry," she said after I explained the situation. "That sounds exactly like something Margaret would do. I wish I could help immediately, but I'm traveling in Europe right now. By the time I could arrange an international transfer, it would be too late." Each failed attempt made my situation feel more hopeless. I was trapped exactly as my parents had intended, with no clear way out and growing pressure from the restaurant staff. "Is there anything else you might offer as collateral?" James asked, his voice softening slightly. "Jewelry? A valuable watch." I shook my head, then paused. I did have one thing of potential value, my design portfolio. I'd brought it to dinner, hoping pathetically to show my parents my recent work in another futile attempt to earn their approval. "I have my fashion design portfolio," I said hesitantly. "Original sketches and technical drawings. They might be worth something to the right person." James raised an eyebrow, but gestured for me to show him. I retrieved the leather portfolio from beside my chair and carefully opened it on the cleared table. Inside were my best pieces from the past year, detailed fashion illustrations, technical flat drawings, and innovative design concepts I developed during my brief time in the industry. Each piece represented hours of careful work and creative vision. To my surprise, James's professional demeanor shifted as he examined the first illustration. "These are quite sophisticated," he said, studying a detailed evening gown design with genuine interest. "You created all of these yourself?" I nodded, a small spark of pride momentarily overriding my panic. "I studied fashion design at RISD. These are from my recent collection concepts." James carefully examined each piece, asking thoughtful questions about my design process and inspiration. His knowledge of fashion and art was surprisingly extensive for a restaurant manager, and for the first time that evening, someone was actually seeing my work rather than dismissing it. "My sister owns a boutique gallery in Soho," he said after reviewing the entire portfolio. "She specializes in fashion illustration and emerging designers. Would you mind if I called her? She might be interested in your work." Hope flickered faintly in my chest. Would she come here tonight? I'm still facing this immediate crisis. "Let me call her," James said, stepping away to make the call privately. While waiting, I tried Sarah again, who confirmed she'd transferred the $300 she'd promised. It was a tiny fraction of what I owed, but knowing someone was trying to help gave me strength to keep fighting. James returned 15 minutes later with cautiously optimistic news. Elena is on her way. She was intrigued by my description of your work, but I should manage expectations. Even if she's interested, she probably won't be able to cover the entire bill immediately. I nodded, grateful for even this possibility. I understand. Thank you for trying. While we waited for Elena, I noticed an elegant older couple at a nearby table watching our interaction with obvious concern. The woman leaned over to whisper something to her husband, who nodded before standing and approaching our table. "Excuse me," he said, his voice gentle but authoritative. "I'm Dr. Michael Harrison, and that's my wife Helen. We couldn't help but overhear some of your situation, and we're appalled by what's happened to you." Embarrassment flooded through me anew. "I'm so sorry to have disturbed your dinner. This is incredibly humiliating." Dr. Harrison waved away my apology. "Young lady, you have nothing to apologize for. What kind of parents would abandon their child in such a situation? In 30 years of dining here, I've never witnessed anything so cruel." His wife Helen approached and placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "We have a daughter about your age," she said softly. "If anyone ever treated her this way, I would be devastated. You shouldn't have to face this alone." Their unexpected kindness brought fresh tears to my eyes. Complete strangers were showing me more compassion than my own parents had in years. "We'd like to help," Dr. Harrison said firmly. "Not as charity, but as an investment in someone who clearly doesn't deserve this treatment." Before I could protest, Helen added, "We also have a guest apartment above our brownstone that's currently empty. If you need a place to stay after tonight, you're welcome to use it." Their generosity was overwhelming. These people knew nothing about me except that I was in crisis, yet they were offering both financial help and shelter. 20 minutes later, Elena Marchetti arrived. She was younger than I'd expected, probably in her early 30s, dressed in the kind of effortlessly chic style that marked her as someone deeply embedded in the fashion world. "James told me about your work," she said, settling into a chair beside me. "May I see your portfolio?" Unlike James's polite interest, Elena's evaluation was intensely professional. She studied each piece in focused silence, occasionally asking specific technical questions about my design process or inspiration. The minutes stretched uncomfortably, but I resisted the urge to fill the silence with nervous explanations. Finally, she looked up with an expression I couldn't quite read. "These are exceptional," she said. "Particularly this evening wear series. There's something reminiscent of vintage Halston, but with a contemporary architectural sensibility that feels completely fresh." Her specific, knowledgeable feedback was the kind of professional validation I'd been craving. This wasn't polite encouragement or dismissive criticism. This was a genuine expert recognizing merit in my work. "I'd like to purchase 3 of these pieces outright," Elena continued. "And I'm interested in featuring your work in my gallery's next Emerging Designers Showcase." My heart raced. "How much are you offering?" The figure she quoted wasn't enough to cover the entire bill, but combined with Sarah's contribution and my own meager funds, it would make a significant impact. More importantly, she was offering something I'd been seeking for months: professional recognition and opportunity. "But these are some of my strongest pieces," I said, hesitating. "I was hoping to use them for job applications and portfolio submissions."
Elena smiled.
"That's exactly why I want them. They demonstrate your potential. And this gallery showing isn't just a purchase, it's a career opportunity. I work with several fashion houses that are always looking for fresh talent." As we negotiated the final terms, James returned with an update from the restaurant management. "Given the highly unusual circumstances," he said, "we've agreed to reduce the bill by 20% as a professional courtesy." The combination of Elena's purchase, the restaurant's discount, and the contributions from Sarah and the Harrisons brought me within a few $100s of the total. I was calculating repayment schedules in my head when Dr. Harrison approached again. "The remaining balance is taken care of," he said firmly. "And I don't want to hear any arguments about it." I can't accept that much help, I protested, overwhelmed by their generosity. It's too much from people I just met. Helen joined her husband. Consider it an investment in your future, dear. But we do have one condition. What's that? I asked cautiously. You don't go back to those people tonight, Dr. Harrison said, his expression serious. Anyone who would put their own child in this position doesn't deserve to have that child returned to them. But I don't have anywhere else to go, I admitted. All my things are at their apartment. That's why we offered our guest space, Helen reminded me. It's fully furnished and available for as long as you need it. Their offer was so unexpected, so generous, that I could barely speak. These strangers were offering me more support and kindness than my own family had provided in years. As Elena helped me gather my remaining artwork and James processed the various payments, my phone rang. After hours of silence, my father was finally calling. My hand hovered over the screen, tempted to ignore it as they had ignored me. But something inside me needed closure. I answered. So, my father's voice came through with its familiar note of smug expectation. Have you learned your lesson? Have I learned my lesson? I repeated, my voice steadier than I'd expected. Yes, but probably not the one you intended to teach. There was a pause. What does that mean? How did you manage to pay the bill? I sold my artwork, I replied, unable to keep a note of pride for my voice. 3 pieces, actually, to a gallery owner who appreciates talent. His dismissive laugh was immediate and predictable. Don't be ridiculous, Isabella. Who would pay real money for your fashion sketches? The comment that would have devastated me hours earlier now strengthened my resolve. Someone who actually understands art and design, unlike you. And I'm not coming home tonight. Don't be dramatic. My mother's voice cut in. She'd put me on speaker. You're overreacting to a simple lesson in responsibility. A simple lesson? I echoed, my voice rising with disbelief. You abandoned me with a $15,000 bill and blocked my calls. There's nothing simple about that. Where exactly do you think you're going to go? My father demanded, his tone shifting from smugness to concern as he realized his plan wasn't working as expected. I looked around at the people who had rallied to help me. Elena organizing my portfolio with professional care, the Harrisons watching me with encouraging smiles, even James, who had transformed from adversary to advocate over the course of the evening. I have options, I said simply. Goodbye. I ended the call before they could respond and turned off my phone completely. The simple act of disconnecting from them felt like removing a weight I'd carried my entire life. Elena finished organizing my remaining artwork and handed the portfolio back to me. I meant what I said about the gallery showcase, she said. And about connecting you with fashion industry contacts. Your work deserves to be seen. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of practical arrangements. Elena gave me her card and outlined plans for the gallery showing. The Harrisons provided their address and a spare key to their guest apartment. Even James, who had finished a shift, offered to help me retrieve my belongings from my parents' place. I've seen enough family drama in this business, he said. Sometimes you need allies when dealing with difficult people. As we prepared to leave the restaurant, other diners who had witnessed the evening's events stopped by to offer support. A marketing executive handed me her business card, mentioning that her firm sometimes worked with fashion consultants. A retired fashion photographer praised my technical skills and suggested I consider expanding into fashion illustration for magazines. What had begun as the most humiliating experience of my life was transforming into an unexpected networking opportunity. The very public nature of my parents' lesson had created an audience for my work and my story. When we finally left Le Bernardin, I found myself standing on the sidewalk with Dr. and Helen Harrison, Elena, and James. The city lights twinkled around us, and for the first time in months, I felt something approaching hope. Ready to see your new temporary home? Helen asked, linking her arm through mine with maternal warmth. Elena offered to drive me to my parents' apartment to collect my belongings. I'll wait outside, she said. But I'll be there if you need backup. The drive uptown was quiet, giving me time to process the extraordinary events of the evening. When we arrived at the familiar building, I asked Elena to wait 30 minutes before checking on me. If I'm not out by then, come find me, I said, only half joking about the potential for drama. The penthouse was blazing with lights when I arrived, indicating my parents were anxiously awaiting my return. I used my key for what I knew would be the last time and stepped into the marble foyer. My mother appeared immediately, her composed facade cracking around the edges. Isabella, thank goodness. We were worried when you didn't answer our calls. Were you? I asked, moving past her toward the elevator to my room. That's an interesting way to show concern. My father emerged from his study, his expression a mixture of anger and confusion. Now listen here, young lady. No, I cut him off firmly. I'm here to collect my things, and then I'm leaving. Their shock was evident as I rode the elevator to my floor. They followed, protests and justifications flowing freely. The lesson was for my own good. I needed to learn independence. They were trying to prepare me for the real world. I tuned out their voices as I packed, taking only what was truly mine, my clothes, design supplies, sketchbooks, and a few cherished personal items. I left behind the expensive gadgets they'd bought me, the designer accessories they'd insisted I needed, all the material symbols of the life they'd chosen for me. When my suitcases were packed, I faced them one final time in the hallway outside my childhood bedroom. You want to teach me about surviving on my own? I said, my voice calm despite the tears on my cheeks. Congratulations. Lesson learned. Where will you go? My mother asked, her voice smaller now, perhaps finally grasping the magnitude of what they'd done. Somewhere I'm valued for who I am, not punished for who I'm not, I replied, thinking of the kindness strangers had shown me and the professional opportunities that were opening up. My father's expression hardened in that familiar way. You're making a mistake, Isabella. Without our support, you have nothing. I thought of Elena's gallery offer, the Harrisons' generosity, the business cards in my purse, and the portfolio of work that had impressed actual professionals in my field. You're wrong, I said simply. Without you, I finally have the chance to discover what I'm actually capable of. I walked out of the apartment without looking back, tears streaming down my face, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of finally breaking free from expectations that had never fit who I truly was. Elena was waiting in the lobby exactly as promised. She didn't ask questions when I appeared with my luggage, just helped me load everything into her car and drove toward the Harrisons' brownstone in the village. The guest apartment was charming, a converted carriage house with exposed brick walls, large windows, and enough space for me to set up a small design studio. Dr. Harrison and Helen showed me around with genuine enthusiasm, pointing out the well-equipped kitchenette and the small garden space outside my door. We usually rent this to visiting professors or artists, Helen explained. But it's been empty for 2 months. Consider it yours for as long as you need. This is incredibly generous, I said, still overwhelmed by their kindness. Please let me pay something, or at least help with household tasks. Dr. Harrison waved away my concerns. We'll work out the details later. Tonight, you need rest and space to process everything that's happened. After they left me alone in the apartment, I sat on the edge of the unfamiliar bed, the events of the evening washing over me in waves. My phone buzzed continuously with messages from my parents, alternating between demands that I return home immediately and softer attempts to guilt me into compliance. I sent a single text message, I'm safe and need space to think. Then I silenced all notifications from their numbers. That first night, I slept fitfully, dreams filled with unpayable bills and abandonment. But when morning came, I woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the distant sound of Helen tending her garden. It was the beginning of something entirely new. Elena had arranged for me to visit her gallery that afternoon to discuss the showcase and see where my work would be displayed. The space was everything I'd hoped for, clean, well-lit, with a reputation for discovering emerging talent. Your pieces will fit perfectly in our Spring Emerging Designers exhibition, she said, showing me the wall space where my work would hang. We're featuring 5 artists, and you're the youngest we've ever included. The validation was intoxicating. For the first time in my life, someone was investing in my potential rather than criticizing my choices. I also spoke with a friend who works at a sustainable fashion startup in Brooklyn, Elena continued. They're looking for a design assistant. It's not glamorous, lots of technical drawing and pattern work, but it's a real position in the industry. The job interview was scheduled for the following week. As I prepared for it, I felt a mixture of nervous excitement and genuine hope that had been absent from my life for months. The Harrisons proved to be ideal temporary landlords, giving me space while also including me in their lives when I wanted company. Dr. Harrison was a retired literature professor with an extensive library, while Helen was a former museum curator who understood the challenges of building a creative career. Talent isn't enough, she told me over tea one afternoon. You need persistence, connections, and the confidence to advocate for your own work. Your parents tried to undermine that confidence, but it's still there. Her words helped me understand that my self-doubt wasn't based on actual inadequacy, but on years of systematic criticism designed to maintain control. The design assistant position turned out to be exactly what I needed, challenging work that utilized my skills while providing steady income and professional experience. The startup's focus on sustainable fashion aligned with my own values, and my colleagues were collaborative rather than competitive. 3 months after the restaurant incident, my life had stabilized in ways I'd never imagined possible. I'd moved from the Harrisons' guest house to a small but charming apartment in Brooklyn, close enough to my job that I could walk to work. My pieces in Elena's gallery show had attracted positive attention, leading to freelance illustration work and commissions. Most importantly, I was building a life based on my own choices rather than my parents' expectations. My relationship with my parents remained complicated. They continued reaching out sporadically, their messages cycling through anger, manipulation, and occasional attempts at reconciliation. I responded rarely, and only when I felt emotionally ready to engage. 6 months after that transformative dinner, I received an unexpected email from my mother. Instead of her usual blend of guilt and demands, it was a simple message. Saw the article about your gallery show in New York Magazine. Your father and I are proud of what you've accomplished. Would you be willing to have coffee sometime? The article she referenced was a small feature about emerging designers to watch, but seeing my name and work in print felt like a major victory. More significantly, it represented the kind of recognition I'd always craved, professional acknowledgement based on merit rather than connections or family influence. I stared at my mother's message for a long time before responding. I'm open to coffee, but only if you're prepared to discuss our relationship honestly and without trying to control the conversation. Her reply came quickly. I understand. We have a lot to talk about. When we met the following week at a neutral cafe in Midtown, my mother looked smaller than I remembered. Her usual armor of designer clothes and perfect makeup couldn't hide the uncertainty in her eyes. I want to apologize, she said before I could speak. What we did at the restaurant was cruel and inexcusable. We told ourselves it was tough love, but we were wrong. It wasn't a complete acknowledgement of all the damage they'd done over the years, but it was a start. We talked for 2 hours, and for the first time in my adult life, my mother listened without trying to redirect or correct my feelings. We were so focused on protecting you from failure that we never let you learn to succeed on your own terms, she admitted. Seeing you thrive without us has been both heartbreaking and enlightening. The conversation wasn't a magic cure for years of complicated family dynamics, but it was genuine progress. We agreed to continue meeting occasionally, with the understanding that any future relationship would be built on mutual respect rather than control and compliance. My father took longer to come around. When he finally reached out, it was through a formal email that read more like a business proposal than a personal message. But gradually, as my career continued to develop, he began to understand that creative work could be both personally fulfilling and financially viable. The real transformation came a year after the restaurant incident, when I was offered a position as lead designer at a sustainable fashion company that was expanding rapidly. The salary was more than respectable, and the creative freedom was everything I dreamed of during those dark months of unemployment. Elena's gallery had become a regular venue for my work, and I'd built a network of industry contacts who valued my skills and perspective. More importantly, I developed the confidence to advocate for myself and my ideas in professional settings. Looking back, I can see that my parents' cruel lesson taught me something they never intended, that I was far stronger and more resourceful than any of us had realized. Being forced to survive that humiliation without their safety net proved that I could handle whatever challenges my chosen career might bring. The restaurant where it all began, Le Bernardin, became an unlikely symbol of transformation in my life. I returned there exactly 1 year later, this time as a successful designer celebrating a major commission. James, the manager who had helped me that terrible night, was still there and remembered me immediately. "Look at you," he said with genuine warmth. "I told Elena you were special, but even I didn't expect you to rise this quickly." Sitting at a table just a few feet from where I'd faced financial ruin and family abandonment, I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought me full circle. The scared, humiliated young woman who had sat alone with an unpayable bill was gone, replaced by someone who had learned to trust her own abilities and judgment. That night, as I walked through the city streets toward my apartment, I realized that my parents' attempt to break me had actually been the catalyst for the most important growth of my life. They had wanted to teach me about failure, but instead, they had taught me about resilience, community, and the power of authentic self-expression. The cruel joke they had played, abandoning me with a massive bill to prove my inadequacy, had backfired spectacularly. Instead of crawling back to them in defeat, I had discovered my own strength and built a life that reflected my true values and aspirations. 6 months later, I opened my own design studio, specializing in sustainable fashion for young professionals. The business plan I presented to potential investors included a personal story about overcoming adversity and finding unexpected allies in moments of crisis. Several investors mentioned that my resilience and problem-solving abilities were as impressive as my design portfolio. Elena became not just a business partner, but a mentor and friend. The Harrisons remained important figures in my life, with Helen serving as an unofficial advisor for my business ventures and Dr. Harrison providing emotional support during challenging periods. Even Sarah, who had transferred her last $300 to help me in my moment of need, became part of my success story when I hired her as my studio's operations manager. Her loyalty during my darkest hour had cemented a friendship that would last a lifetime. My relationship with my parents gradually evolved into something healthier, but fundamentally different from what it had been. They learned to respect my choices and achievements, while I learned to appreciate their support without depending on their approval for my self-worth. The most surprising development came when my father, impressed by my business acumen and financial success, asked for my advice on incorporating sustainable practices into his own company. The role reversal was both ironic and deeply satisfying. The child he had once dismissed as a failure was now consultant to his established business. 2 years after that transformative dinner, I was featured on the cover of a major fashion industry magazine as one of the 30 under 30 designers to watch. The article detailed my journey from unemployment to entrepreneurship, including the dramatic story of how a family crisis had become the catalyst for professional success. When the magazine hit newsstands, my mother called to congratulate me. "We're framing this," she said, her voice filled with the kind of pride I'd spent years trying to earn. "I want everyone to see what our daughter has accomplished." The recognition felt gratifying, but it no longer carried the desperate emotional weight it once had. I had learned to value my own assessment of my work and achievements, regardless of external validation. As I sit in my design studio today, surrounded by sketches for my upcoming collection and business plans for expansion into new markets, I sometimes think about that terrified young woman who sat alone in Le Bernardin, convinced her life was falling apart. She couldn't have imagined that the worst night of her life would become the foundation for everything good that followed. The parents who tried to teach her about failure instead taught her about strength. The humiliation that was meant to break her spirit actually revealed her resilience. The note they left, "Let's see how failure finds her way out of this one," had become a prophetic challenge. I had found my way out, not by crawling back to them in defeat, but by discovering capabilities I never knew I possessed and building a community of people who valued me for who I truly was. If you've ever felt trapped by other people's expectations or abandoned by those who should support you, Remember that sometimes our greatest growth comes from our most challenging moments. The people who try to limit us often end up setting us free, though rarely in the way they intended. The expensive lesson my parents tried to teach me about failure became the most valuable education I ever received, not in inadequacy, but in self-reliance, creativity, and the unexpected kindness of strangers who can become family when biological family fails us. Today, when young designers ask me for advice about building their careers despite family opposition or financial challenges, I tell them the same thing I learned that night at Bernardin. Sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you needed to discover everything you're actually capable of achieving. The bill that seemed impossible to pay became the price of my freedom. The abandonment that felt like the end of my world became the beginning of my real life. And the parents who tried to teach me I was a failure accidentally taught me the most important lesson of all, that success means living authentically, on your own terms, surrounded by people who see and celebrate your true worth. That $15,000 dinner was the most expensive meal of my life, but it was also the most valuable investment in my future that anyone ever made. Just not in the way my parents intended.